Susan B. Anthony. Hello and welcome to this video on some facts about Susan B. Anthony. Susan B. Anthony was an influential feminist leader, suffragist, and civil rights activist in the United States during the 19th century. She is best known for her work advocating for women's right to vote, but she was also a passionate advocate for the abolition of slavery and other social justice causes. Early life and education. Susan B. Anthony was born on February 15, 1820, in Adams, Massachusetts. Her family was politically active and committed to social justice causes, including the abolition of slavery. Susan was the second of 7 children, and her family's financial situation was often precarious. Nonetheless, her parents ensured that she received a good education, and she attended a Quaker boarding school in Philadelphia. After returning to her family's farm in New York, Anthony became a teacher, but she quickly became disillusioned with the low pay and lack of respect for women in the profession. She left teaching to become involved in social reform efforts, including temperance, the movement to ban alcohol, the abolition of slavery, and women's rights. Women's rights activism. Anthony became involved in the women's rights movement in the mid-1850s, when she met fellow activist Elizabeth Cady Stanton. Together, they worked to organize women's rights conventions, including the famous Seneca Falls Convention of 1848, which is considered the birthplace of the women's suffrage movement in the United States. In addition to organizing conventions and advocating for women's suffrage, Anthony also engaged in more direct action. In 1872, she was arrested for voting in the presidential election, which was illegal for women at the time. She was found guilty and fined $100, but she refused to pay, and the government never collected the money. Anthony continued to advocate for women's rights until her death in 1906. Although she did not live to see the passage of the 19th Amendment, which granted women the right to vote in 1920, her tireless work laid the groundwork for that historic achievement. Abolitionist and civil rights activism. In addition to her work on women's rights, Anthony was also deeply committed to the abolition of slavery and other civil rights causes. She worked closely with prominent abolitionists such as Frederick Douglass and William Lloyd Garrison, and she also supported the Underground Railroad, a network of safe houses and secret routes that helped enslaved people escape to freedom. Later in her life, Anthony also became involved in the temperance movement and the fight for labor rights. She believed that all forms of oppression were interconnected and that the struggle for justice required solidarity across different movements. Legacy. Susan B. Anthony's legacy is far-reaching and profound. She was a trailblazing feminist leader who dedicated her life to advancing the rights of women, African Americans, and other marginalized groups. Her tireless work helped pave the way for the women's suffrage movement and the civil rights movement, and her commitment to justice and equality remains an inspiration to activists today. Frequently asked questions. What did Susan B. Anthony do? Susan B. Anthony was a feminist leader, suffragist, and civil rights activist who advocated for women's right to vote, the abolition of slavery, and other social justice causes. When was Susan B. Anthony born? Susan B. Anthony was born on February 15, 1820. What was the Seneca Falls Convention? The Seneca Falls Convention was a women's rights convention organized by Susan B. Anthony and Elizabeth Cady Stanton in 1848. It is considered the birthplace of the women's suffrage movement in the United States. Was Susan B. Anthony arrested? In 1872, she was arrested for voting in the presidential election, which was illegal for women at the time. Like the video and remember to subscribe to our channel.